Welcome into the Rock Pod from the Royal Oak Chamber of Commerce. I am John Gay from Jag and Detroit Podcasts.
I am Lisa Bibby, your local neighborhood realtor with Keller Williams.
I am Andrea Arndt, an attorney at Dickinson Wright.
And the fourth member of our crew, Trish Carruth, unable to join us today from Your Personal Jeweler. We'll give you her contact information at the end of the show. Today's guest is Jeff Selik from ERSI Water and Fire. Welcome, Jeff. Good to have you with us.
Thank you so much for having me here today.
Before we get into all the stuff that you guys do, give us a little bit about your background and how you came to do what you do.
Sure. Well, my background was originally in furniture, in retail, working with customers for many, many years. And then I found myself in need of new employment, had a flood, and those two things came together where I found the company that I currently work for, ERSI Water and Fire. So I've been on both ends. I've been a customer of a flood, and I've now have the opportunity to help people as well.
Great. Well, thank you so much for joining us. It's kind of funny whenever I'm with a client, we're about to close on a house, we always do a final walkthrough. And I always tell them, I say, look, we're just walking through the house just to make sure a tree doesn't fall through the house. Because the seller's responsible for the house up until the day we close. So if a tree did fall through, is that a service that you would cover?
Yes, it is a service that we can handle. The biggest concern is there a breach in the roof, a breach where water can get in? So the first thing we would want to do is get an emergency tarping done to make sure that the residence or the commercial facility is taken care of and make sure they're protected.
Great. What other types of service does ERSI Water and Fire provide?
Well, as the name says, water and fire are the two biggest services that we have, and water meaning water damage mitigation, whether it's flooding, whether it is from some type of broken pipe, something internal. We do help dry people out so they can get dried out as soon as possible and try to save their home, save their belongings. If there is a fire as well, we can do what we can to help clean contents, clean the building interior, to do what we can to maintain the residents and not have to rebuild as much as possible. But then, of course, we do full reconstruction services after water and fire to get people back to where they started.
So you can remodel my kitchen?
If you had a flood or fire first, yes. That is the one codicil.
Nice.
Jeff, there's a lot of stuff, as we get into January here in the lovely Michigan winter. Can you talk a little bit about ice damming, what causes that, and then problems and solutions for that as well?
Sure. That's something that we actually saw a lot of last winter for the first time in maybe 20 years. Ice damming is something that occurs when we get a lot of snow that accumulates often on our rooftops. And then as the heat starts to gradually rise towards the top of that roof, the snow will start to melt. But as it gets down to the lower points of the roof line, like where the gutters are, it starts to freeze up because it's cooler down there. And unfortunately, as more and more snow and more melting happens, the ice becomes a ledge that you can clearly see that builds up more and more, and it creates heavier and heavier weight that can pull down gutters, can pull down onto the roof line. Unfortunately, can also cause separation in the shingles and cause water. And that's where we would unfortunately have to come in if water can get inside the building from that way. So we tell people to please keep an eye out on that. And there are, as you asked about some preventative measures, things that can be done to take care of that. If people do see that ice that is starting to build up, there is a material that's called calcium chloride. It's not the same type of salt that you would get for your driveway, and it's certainly not the same type of salt you would get for your table, for your food. But you would go to a Home Depot, a Lowe's, any big box store and purchase, and I recommend people buy it before the season so you don't run out as they did last season, and have that on hand, and it just sprinkles. You can just literally, if you have a window that you can sprinkle it out onto the roof line, it will melt it, just like regular salt will melt it, but it's safe for your shingles.
Quick question here for you. So we recently bought a house up north where it's apparently in the snow belt and a ton of snow falls. Do you have any recommendations for what is the maximum amount of snow that a typical roof can hold before you really have to clear it off?
Well, I don't know if there's an exact number as far as of inches of snow, but what I would really look for is a lot of snowing, thawing, and freezing, which we do get a lot of when temperatures raise and it thaws, and then certainly it freezes again. What I do try to tell people is it's not just the roof line and that ice damming. It's often the snow that's around the home that then melts, and water always takes that path of least resistance into the home. So I tell people, it's not just shoveling your driveway. Clear all that snow around your home that's right up against your home, especially if it's blowing up against there, because it's going to melt, and then that water is going to want to go right inside your home. So clear around the home as well.
Well, very good tips. Jeff, my husband's family had a plumbing business, and my husband has shared some horror stories over the years. Not going to excite you with all of those crazy stories, but some of them involved water leaks when people were out of town. So whenever we leave our house for more than a day, we always turn off the water to the house. Now that we're approaching the time of year that many people take vacations or leave their homes empty for periods of time, what other preventative measures do you recommend?
So the main one that I'm going to recommend, I have it in my home and I recommend it for everybody. In Michigan, a lot of our homes certainly have sump pumps. We have the well that's in our home, and the sump pump pumps that water out. So when the water is coming in around the foundation, it keeps our home from having the water from coming in. Well, unfortunately, there are times when those sump pumps fail, whether it is from working overtime when we have huge rainstorms, or in my case, as I mentioned at the beginning, I had a flood in my home. There was sludge and mud and crud that really kind of filled up that pipe. So think of it like an artery that was clogged up, and there wasn't a lot of opportunity for the water to come out. So that sump pump just overworked itself, and then the water level rises. So what I am referring to is the number one thing is a sensor that you can have installed on your sump pump. So if the water level rises, it can trigger, which often goes into someone's central alarm system, as it does in my home. And then you will get an alarm that goes off. It's like a little bobbler, like a fishing bobbler. And then if that thing moves because the water level is coming up, it gives you an early warning detection that your sump pump is not working and you better address it. And I got that notice, but I was in Florida and I was not able to tend to it at 2 a.m. when water likes to come in. But it's my number one recommendation is to get a sump pump detector that tells people if the water level is rising.
Yeah, my client just bought a home with one of those, and it's awesome because it connects right to your app on your phone, and you just get notified right away.
Yes, and that is true too, using technology to have alarms, certainly for safety, but also for anything water related like a sump pump detector. If it can go right to your phone, night or day, in town or out of town, it's really helpful to be able to know when it comes to water, the sooner you can respond, the better your chances are of minimizing damage.
So in case of a water emergency, what are some do's and don'ts that you can advise people to do?
That is a great question, Lisa. I'm going to tell you that a lot of people's first response and first instinct, if their basement is flooding full of water, is they want to perhaps run down there and start saving things and grabbing, maybe photo albums or grabbing, anything that they can think of would be precious to them. But what people don't understand and don't think of is you don't know what kind of water that is at this point that may be coming into your basement. Is it what we call category 3 water, which is contaminated? Is it sewage water? That water is extremely toxic to the touch. It can get on your skin and it can cause infections, rashes. And a lot of people, again, they're just not thinking. They're running downstairs and grabbing things. And even worse, they're taking boxes that could be in contaminating water and then bringing them upstairs and putting that on their floors. Children, pets are running through all that chaos. I know it's human nature, but I tell people they're only belongings. Your life is most important. Your health is most important. Leave it to the experts like us to take care of it. So that as well is one of my number one don'ts is don't let that sense of I need to grab my stuff overtake you. Plan ahead. If you have things that are valuable, get storage racks and get that stuff off the ground. Get it high enough so if there is something that does come in, 1 inch, 2 inch, 3 inch, 6 inches of water, your most prized possessions aren't going to get wet first.
Yeah, that's always a great sign when we're looking at houses and we go downstairs in the basement and the seller has everything stored in boxes sitting on the floor. You're like, great, there's no water damage here.
Well, one thing that I will tell you is there are some very, very smart people on for instance, the Grosse Pointe side of town or areas that you will find that flood quite often that will own their own equipment for drying humidifiers. I should say dehumidifiers. You find that if you do live in an area that floods often and there are surges and then it's hard to find some of this equipment, some people will take the time and the expense to just own their own equipment if they do feel that they're going to flood often enough. But hopefully once every 18 to 20 years is the industry average that somebody will experience a flood. So hopefully not more than that.
Jeff, has that changed at all with climate change? Not to get political or anything like that, but you hear like 100-year flood is now a more often flood, and those benchmarks, I feel like they're changing a little bit.
Oh, there's no doubt about it. I've only been in this industry now since 2019, but we all know that, I had my flood in 2015, and we all know that there was some major flooding incidents in that year. But we have seen this year alone several back-to-back flooding incidents that have been unprecedented. And like I said, the ice damming that occurred this past winter, to my understanding, with people in the insurance industry that I have spoken with, they haven't seen ice damming like that in over 20 years. Unfortunately, I do think that the frequency and the intensity of these weather events are becoming more often. I will share with you some good news, however. I heard a recent study that says that Michigan in the next 20 years is going to be the #1 destination to move to because of our wonderful weather relative to the south with the heat that's going to rise, with our access to fresh water, with our technology. So in 20 years, they say that Michigan is going to be the place to go to. And that's something I read about Royal Oak specifically at the hub of that technology as well.
Very cool. Something to look forward to for sure. And we're in now before it was cool.
That's right.
Jeff, we talked about water, we talked about ice, and you mentioned a moment ago how toxic that water can become. Somewhat related to that is the issue of mold. When can mold come in? Why do you need a professional to remediate it, not just remove it?
Oh, so important, John. Thank you for asking about that. We'll get a lot of calls that people will say, do you guys remove mold or do you clean mold? And I like to point out that terminology because that honestly is not the correct terminology to use. Mold, again, is toxic. And it needs to be remediated by experts that understand how you have to set up containment zones, and you cannot put those spores in the air if you are just cutting panels, haphazardly or just trying to, quote unquote, clean things. You could put that into the air, spread it through the HVAC, create a situation that was worse than before, and an environment that does make the situation, like I said, worse than you intended. Backing up, when does mold potentially set in? Well, we've been dealing with a lot of water lately, and all it takes is something to remain wet for 72 hours.
Wow.
Is the amount of time, yes, that it takes for microbial growth to begin. The unfortunate thing is if people are saying that they see mold potentially, and that's when they called us, that means that there are millions of spores that they are seeing. Millions for it to be something that you can visibly see.
So question on that. I know there's a lot of different types of mold. I'm a mushroom hunter myself. So mold is actually something that is in the air, but there are different types of mold, some which are highly toxic and some which are just normally present. So do you guys test for the different types of mold and explain to people what is a healthy level of mold that's in existence versus, yes, when you need to come in and remediate and make sure those spores don't spread?
Absolutely, Lisa. One of the things that I love about my job is that I get to take the time to explain to people what the process is. Nobody wants to go through a remediation. It's something you have to do. So you might as well have somebody that can explain it, try to make it as understandable in layman terms. And one of the steps that's involved is that we use an outside environmental testing program, a company, I should say, that will come in and they do the testing. This is what every mold remediation company does to keep it above board, is that an outside testing company comes in and they provide the full reporting that says what kind of microbial growth there potentially is, where is it, and then they provide the protocol, or what I like to call the playbook, of how to remediate it properly. That is the same thing they would give us or any company, and then we come in and remediate it according to that playbook. And then they get a post-test after, and hopefully if we did everything according to plan, they will pass that post-test. But as you intended, or as you said, Lisa, there is some degree of mold levels that's in everybody's home, that's in the air. but the testing should provide that you are within levels that are considered normal. They will provide in that test if somebody is exceeding in an area that we have to come in and help with.
So Jeff, we've covered quite a few different services that your company provides. Are there any other services that we haven't discussed yet?
Well, as the shirt says, we cover water, fire, storm, job done. That's pretty much everything. But I do like to point out that whether it is water, whether it is fire, whether it is mold, or whether it is storm damage, we do have full reconstruction services on the back end. A lot of people don't want some company to come in, and I use the term to rip things out. We respect that it's your home. That's your place of solitude. It's your comfort zone. And we don't rip things out. We remove things, and we'll explain why we do things. And then when it comes to rebuilding, that's the fun part. That's what gets you back to where we were before. So I just really like to point out that the first part has to be done, but a lot of companies just do that. We like to say that we are the full service because we will get that first part done, but we will come in with the full reconstruction services to make sure that you get back to where you were before the incident happened.
Oh, that's great that you can fix those problems. Now, we talked a lot about storm damage and flooding, and I was curious because I know there's a big movement about educating people with rain gardens, especially in the Southeast Michigan area, because there's so much pavement that there's nowhere for the water to naturally drain down. So then it turns into flooding of the streets and such. So there's a lot of a push for educating people about rain gardens, where if every person had a rain garden in their yard, a place where the water could actually drain to, and then putting in plants that would then drink up most of that water. So do you do any kind of education or help guide homeowners as to what preventative measures they can do so that they aren't in a flooding situation?
Well, one thing that I will tell you is that sometimes it is something where we can help people, whether it is water damage. Sometimes we'll get a call and they just need waterproofing needs, which really is not something that we handle. Or sometimes they just need a plumber. One of the things that I pride myself, certainly in our company, is if it's not something that's a service we handle, I always want to make sure that we can get somebody to a local company that can help them with what they need. We do know a lot of plumbers, a lot of electricians, certainly a lot of people in those fields that can help out when people need. If we do see that somebody has something that perhaps needs to be done or could be done to help them, perhaps with preventative measures, of course, we want to tell them about that. We do our inspections when we're certainly doing any type of water damage claim work. Sometimes people don't even know where the water comes from, and that can be a challenge in its own right, that you have to help find out where the water is coming from. And again, that can be, like I said, a challenge. How do you stop something from happening when you don't know where it's necessarily coming from? So every day can be an interesting challenge, but for right now, it's just trying to get everybody taken care of. And unfortunately, lately, it's been a lot of people at the same time that have needed help. But thankfully, we've caught up, and being in the winter time now, it's just a matter of trying to be responsive and help people as quickly as we can.
Lisa, just a quick comment on a rain garden. My husband and I did an experiment, and we hooked up a rain barrel to a gutter, and half our yard, we watered our garden and grass with the barrel water, and the other half we used the hose water. And it was incredible how big and how healthy all the plants were from the rain barrel water versus the city water. Just amazing.
I love that experiment. Yeah, it's literally like water that falls from the sky comes through its own filtration system. One thing to keep in mind, though, depends on the type of shingles you have on your house. Some of that water that runs down is not considered drinkable. And or, if you're putting it on a vegetable garden or something like that, you do want to make sure that that water is okay to use. But especially for watering flowers or your lawn, it's a great way to reuse the water that's just dropping from the sky.
Jeff, we've talked about water, ice, a lot of other kind of damage. Something you mentioned on your website is loss of power. If your home loses power, is there a general guideline for when somebody should contact you at ERSI? I mean, obviously, if your power is out for an hour from a storm, that's not a big deal. But does that depend on your power needs? Does it depend on how long it's out? What can you tell us about loss of power, and then when to call you and what you can do about it?
Well, it ties into what we mentioned before, your sump pump. probably operates on your electricity. And if you lose power, and that happened in several cities where they lost power with storms over the past several months. And again, if you lose your sump pump, then you got problems there. Generators are available. They're not necessarily inexpensive. There are a lot of people that live in certain communities that are wooded that know they're going to lose power a lot, and they have taken the time and the expense to invest in having generators. But I would say for typical storms, we all know that if you lose power for a few hours, even a handful of hours, as long as the refrigerator is left closed and the freezer's left closed and it doesn't need to be opened any more than necessary, and as long as people are safe from, if it is in the summer and they're safe from, extreme temperatures, and in the winter, want to make sure people are safe from extreme temperatures. Usually a few hours, people are fine, but you definitely don't want to be without power for too long. We take it for granted, don't we?
Sure do. Can you explain what type of situations are typically covered by insurance?
Well, that's a sticky question because every claim is going to be a little bit different. But what I will tell you is that, normally it's something that has to be caused by water that was often internally, like a broken pipe, will be covered. It cannot be something that has been an existing situation. It has to be from a specific incident. That is maybe one of the biggest delineating factors that I could kind of point out that I've seen. If someone has water damage and it's just been from over time and they haven't addressed it, there is some response time responsibility from a homeowner that you tend to as soon as possible and that you don't let it get worse. So that would probably be the biggest thing, is to make sure that it's something that occurred from a specific incident that was traceable and was recent. I will dovetail into that sometimes people don't know whether they should or should not make an insurance claim. And that might be something that is really an individual situation to assess what is their deductible and how extensive is the damage. Again, every situation is different, but that is the question I would ask is the damage outweigh my deductible? And if not, having somebody from a company come in and give you an evaluation of your damage, not a detailed line estimate, but maybe an evaluation, can give you some guidance whether it's worth it to make a claim or not.
So, Jeff, we always love getting to know our guests a little bit more personally. So besides helping everybody during these emergencies, what do you do outside of work for fun?
So my personal time has been limited a little bit lately because I have two very little ones. I have a little boy that is 15 months old, and then I have a little girl that will be 3 years old in February. So two very little ones.
You got your hands full.
Yes, I do. And then I have a 15-year-old daughter who is in driver's ed right now. So that has been balancing those spectrums at both ends, trying to certainly do what I can on the work side, but want to be there for the family and spend time with them. I've enjoyed the work balance that I've had, spending time with the kids, the little ones especially, over the past couple years. It has been absolutely amazing.
Well, that sounds wonderful. So now it is time for our fishbowl question of the day, where we pull a totally random question for you. John, can you pull the fishbowl question of the day?
All right, let's dig in here and look. This is an interesting one, okay? Jeff, what would be the coolest animal to scale up to be the size of a horse?
What would be the coolest animal to scale up to the size of a horse? I actually have an answer for that. And it's really weird that I have an answer for that, because I saw one recently, a prehistoric one.
It exists?
It used to. Do you know that dogs used to be the size of horses?
Really?
Yes, I was just in LA at the Museum of Natural History, and they have a full-size skeleton of a dog, a prehistoric dog. And they used to be the size of tigers and big lions, and absolutely huge. So I want to see one of those prehistoric dogs that I can saddle up and ride. I think that would be really cool.
Could you imagine how big its tongue is to lick you?
I know, right?
There's actually a dog. I've seen pictures floating around. I think it is the size of a horse. It's a monster. So Google that if you get a chance.
I'm thinking about my 70-pound lab and the amount we spend on her prescription dog food. I can't imagine how high that would be if she was 3 times the size.
I think I would teach it to stand up and name it Chewbacca. I think I would have to do that. Exactly.
Well, it's funny because I have a German Shepherd who's fairly large. He's 155 pounds, and we always call him a horse. And the kids, kind of take turns riding him, but not anymore.
I'm literally Googling this as we're talking about it, and the images are cracking me up. There's like St. Bernards and Great Mastiffs in a picture of it looks like a girl in a full riding outfit on top of a horse. So I guess they exist today.
That would be a cool animal.
Lisa, send me that link and we'll put it in our show notes for anybody who wants to take a look at it.
Yeah, I'll do that.
Jeff, thanks so much for joining us today. If people want to know more about your business, what is the website, phone number, and best ways to reach you?
Sure. Our website is www.877jobdone.com. And you can reach us at that very same phone number at 877-JOB-DONE, which is 877-562-3663.
Thank you so much for being on our show today as a guest, Jeff. This was really informational. My name is Lisa Bibby. I'm a realtor with Keller Williams Advantage, and I put the real back in realtor. Looking to buy or sell your home, purchase an investment property, or even start an Airbnb? You can find me on Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram at Sold by Lisa B.
My name is Andrea Arndt. I am an intellectual property attorney at Dickinson Wright, and I help my clients protect their inventions and build their brands. You can find me on LinkedIn and on our firm's website, www.dickinsonwright.com.
I'm John Gay from Jag in Detroit Podcasts for help creating a podcast, improving your existing show, or starting a show in 2022. You can find me at jagindetroit.com or on social media at jagindetroit. Also, for our fourth co-host, Trish, not able to be here today, she is Trish Carruth, third-generation jeweler and owner of Your Personal Jeweler, specializing in creating custom engagement wedding rings and fine jewelry. You can find her on Instagram and Facebook at The Personal Jeweler or on their website, thepersonaljeweler.com. Jeff, thanks again for being here. For everyone listening, The Rock Pod is a production of the Royal Oak, Michigan Chamber of Commerce. You can find out more about the Chamber at royaloakchamber.com. And for Chamber members, if you want to be a guest on our show, you can send us an email, therockpod@gmail.com. That's TheRoccpod@gmail.com. Thanks, everyone.